really great to be here and great to see so many people. So before I really dive into my academic background and my career background and all the medical device and particle physics things that I've done, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and tell you about my personal background and really where I come from. So I was born outside the US. I grew up in Russia and Ukraine, and that's where I lived until I was about 10 years old. And for those of you that know a little bit about the history of the region, you might know that the USSR collapsed in the late 80s and early 90s, which meant that a lot of people were emigrating from the area to different parts of the world. So it just so happens that my mom took a huge risk and as a single parent was able to bring myself and my sister over to the States. And so we landed in Chicago, no English, little money, very few friends. And at that point, I saw how hard my mom was working. And I saw that my job at that point was to go to school. And to go to school hard. I was gonna kill it. So the way that I thought about helping my family was to do really, really well educationally so that later on I could take care of my mom and my family. So that was a huge motivation for me. I did middle school, just as most people did, and I got a really lucky break in high school. So Illinois has this really special school called the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy. And it's a public school, but you have to test into it. So you have to take the SATs, you have to write essays, you have to get teacher recs. But if you do get into it, it's an incredibly rich and rigorous program to prepare you for college. So I applied to the school, I got in, and that was really the first time that I felt like I was being challenged in school, and I felt like I was living out to my full potential. And so, as the name implies, there was a lot of curriculum that was really heavily focused on math and science. And another really great thing that they had there is this internship program. So, for my internship program, I happened to land at this place called Argonne Laboratory. So, it might sound a little crazy, but basically Argonne is this national laboratory where they do high energy particle physics. And what that means is they have a lot of really fancy lab setups that can take atoms and smash them together really fast, and you essentially get to learn more about physics and more about the universe that way. And that was incredibly appealing to me because from an early age, I was just really fascinated not only with how things work, but really where we as human beings are in the greater scope of things. So I was really fascinated with astrophysics and things like that, and particle physics is a pretty close relationship to that. So I did an internship there at Argonne, and one of the most memorable moments for me was my second day there. I was meeting with my lead scientist, and she gave me this paper that was the background for the project that I was going to be working on. And this was a straight up, academic, straight out of journal paper. And I remember looking at it, and I literally understood maybe every other word, and not even how the sentence was structured. Now, I did know English at this point, so that wasn't the problem, but I didn't know academic English. So that's an example of a situation where I was placed in an incredibly uncomfortable position, but I learned a lot, and I learned fast, and I grew. And so that's really been a theme with a lot of the experiences that I've had throughout my educational career and my real-world kind of job career. So, long story short, when I was in high school, again, very math and science focused, looking at applying to colleges, I knew that I wanted to do something technical, wasn't exactly sure what that meant. I applied to a bunch of programs that were engineering, that were technical, that were architecture, math. I was kind of all over the map. And the place that I ended up landing in is this very small school called Olin College out in Boston. And as fate would have it, the year that I was graduating from high school was the year that they were taking on their first ever class. So this was a startup school. There was no classes before it. When I visited the campus, it was a construction site. There were giant piles of dirt and no buildings. So for my first year of college, I lived, breathed, studied and participated in all sorts of programs with 29 other students that were freshly graduated from high school. And together we made up this partner year of students who helped shape the college, shape the curriculum, set up the student government, set up the community service opportunities that we had. And we really got to know our faculty members a lot. And one of the really great things about the undergrad education that I got is the fact that we got to do a lot of hands-on projects. So whenever you have an opportunity to actually build something, whether it's a software program or a mechanical device, it's the best way to actually learn a skill. Not by reading a book, although it's great to use for reference, it's to actually apply it when you're doing a project. In case it wasn't clear, I did mechanical engineering in undergrad. So I had a great experience, and by the end of my career there, I started thinking, okay, it's my senior year in college, what's the next step? What is it that I'm gonna do? And I did a lot of back and forth, and I knew that I was gonna be applying to grad school, because it seemed like I had such an incredible time in this academic learning environment that was gonna be the next step. I applied to 3 schools, all of them in California, because Olin was in Boston, and I was not going to live through another winter. So luckily, I did get accepted, and I ended up at Stanford, once again in their mechanical engineering department. So coming into Stanford, I thought I was going to be doing a lot of work with MEMS, which is basically really, really tiny devices. That's where I wrote all my essays on. I had a little bit of background in it, but I'm pretty sure that's what my PhD was going to be in. So, turns out, when you come to grad school, one of the things I encourage you to do is to go to seminars and to learn more about different fields that are being studied at Stanford and different avenues that are available to you for research, for growth, just for general development. And in one of those seminars, I learned about medical devices, which had not been on my radar at all, mostly because I hate biology. I still kind of do. But I really started thinking a little bit more about medical devices. And to me, it was the perfect blend of taking my mechanical engineering skills and actually using them to better the world. And not to better the world by creating another iPhone, which I love my iPhone, I would trade it, but bettering the world by improving someone's health and, in some cases, saving someone's life. You know, to me, that's a really powerful proposition. I have a lot of friends that work in tech fields and other industries, and they sometimes get burned down, they sometimes question why it is they do what they do. I never have that question. I know exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's helping people in a tremendous way. So in grad school, I, as you might have observed, very quickly fell in love with medical devices. And I did a lot of my studies in that field. So by the way, are there any questions so far? I'm pretty casual, so I'm happy to yield questions, or I'll just dive more into my research. All right, feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. Oh yeah, by the way, this is my recap slide, in case you guys are wondering where I was zigzagging. So from Eastern Europe to middle of the country right here in Chicago, over to Boston, and finally landed here in the Bay Area for grad school. All right, so a little bit more about what it is that I actually do or did in grad school. A little anatomy here for those of you that can't quite picture what we're looking at here. So this is the spine, all right? It's the human spine. We got your rib cage going on here, and your hip bones here. You have this really, really big blood vessel that runs along your spine. That's called the aorta. So the aorta is this major highway that your blood takes to get from your heart to your lower body. So every single drop of blood that comes to your lower body has to come from this blood vessel. So it's pretty important. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that this part of the blood vessel is pretty narrow, right? This upper part. And as you're traveling down and looking here, this gets super, super wide. Okay, that's called an aneurysm. That's bad. So basically what happens in this disease state is your abdominal aorta, this blood vessel, keeps just getting bigger and bigger, and the wall, your vessel wall, gets weaker and weaker, and eventually, if it's left untreated, it actually bursts. So remember, I mentioned this is the major highway that your blood takes to get from your heart to your lower body. So this thing bursts, everyone's in big trouble. And this is actually the 13th leading cause of death in the US. And this specific disease is what I focused on studying in my PhD. So good news though, there are ways to treat it. Now the traditional way is a little bit gruesome. Essentially, the patient is laid down on a table. There's a giant incision that's made in the abdomen, and this portion of the blood vessel is just completely cut out, and they physically sew on this artificial graft. So it's a really, really brutal procedure. Most of the people that have this disease are older, so it's already hard for them to go through any kind of operation. But the good news is there's a minimally invasive way to treat this, and it's through a device called an endograft. And this is basically a diagram of the device here. So we're going from real anatomy here to kind of cartoonish anatomy, so I'll talk you through it. So right up here is this aorta that I told you about. So seeing here, you see this blood vessel. This is our bulge, so this red outline here, and that's kind of like the bulge that we see here. Now, this diagram actually shows where the endograft is inserted. So it's basically a metal scaffold that pushes against the healthy wall here and here, and then along the length of the scaffold is a fabric. So when it's inserted into the patient, all the blood actually just travels through the graft and doesn't touch the wall. So, I'll pop here. All right, here we go. So I have some examples here that I'll pass around. So this is an example of an endograft that actually goes into the human body. Don't worry, this one didn't. We also have grafts that look like this, kind of look like a pair of pants. And so essentially what this graft will do is sit on this split of the blood vessel, this bifurcation. So kind of like just make it its way right there so that it doesn't actually move over time, which is one of the biggest problems with these devices. So actually I'll pass it. Perfect. Now, for those that are wondering how this thing actually gets into the human body, I mentioned this is a minimally invasive surgery. So if you look at our little vascular skeleton here, you see that our body is made up of this really complex network of blood vessels. So it turns out we can now get to all sorts of part of the body by just entering the vessel network through your leg, most often through your thigh. And the devices that we use to enter are called catheters. So catheters are essentially these sheets. So think of them as a straw that you can actually push up into your blood vessel. And inside that straw, you can stuff whatever device you want, as long as it fits. That's the big problem. So if you have a device like this, you have to make sure that you can collapse it to a small enough diameter so super, super tiny diameter, so it actually fits inside that straw, and you can deliver it to the human body. And interestingly enough, this is not the only part of the body where you can treat with catheters. We can now actually treat a lot of diseases of the brain by literally passing catheters and wires through an opening in the leg. So that's pretty cool. That basically takes away a lot of the need for open procedures, which are really hard on the patient, really expensive for the hospital. So it's an example of where everyone's a winner. And this is just a quick summary of the different types of devices that you have to treat abdominal aortic aneurysms. So specifically the work that I did in grad school had to do with understanding how these different shapes and geometries actually interact with the human body. So is it better to have longer legs, shorter legs? What should the diameter be? How much should the device be pushing on the wall? And a lot of that work was done by using computational fluid dynamics, CFD, so it's a lot of modeling. Some of it was done with animal work, and some of it was also done by building anatomical representations or models on the bench top and just running blood through it to see what happens. So, yeah, there we go. So after I finished with graduate school, I really wanted to continue with my journey into medical devices and specifically minimally invasive surgery. So the next set of devices I'll talk to you about are called Trocars. Has anyone had their gallbladder taken out here or know someone that has? All right, good, good. Depending on when you had it taken out, you may have had an open procedure, which is here, or you may have had a laparoscopic procedure, which is here. So open is exactly what it sounds like. You cut into the patient. There's a big opening that basically gives the surgeon room to operate. So he can see your gallbladder, he can see how it's connected to your body, and then he goes in there, he cuts it out, he secures all the blood vessels, so everything is functioning the way it's supposed to. Now, similarly to abdominal aortic aneurysm treatments, if you do an open procedure here, it's more time, it's more risk for infection because you have a gaping wound on your abdomen now, and you actually have a much longer recovery. So again, it's a really, really heavy procedure to go through. Now, the alternative is to have a laparoscopic procedure. So laparoscopic basically means that instead of having this big, big hole in the middle of the patient, you make a few really small incisions and you push instruments through those incisions. And this allows you to do the same operations that you would in the open case, but this time you just have these 4 small nicks. So the device that I work on is right here. It's called a Trocar. It's the first device that's inserted when you're doing laparoscopic surgery. And here's how it's done. All right, so the patient's on the table. They're totally knocked out. There's a small nick that's made in their skin. And then this device is just pushed into the abdomen. So this is actually made up of 2 pieces. We have this thing called the obturator, and this one's called the cannula. So when this is assembled together and pushing through the patient, this part of the device is actually what's cutting tissue and getting you through all the muscle and fat, etc., until you can see inside the abdominal cavity. And once you're inside, you can actually just pull this out. This cannula now sticks out of the patient, and it's called a port. So it's a way for the surgeon to then put instruments in and out of here. And of course, one of the most vital instruments that's inserted into a trocar is a scope and a camera. So basically, it's a way for the surgeon to see what's going on inside the abdominal cavity. And of course, we also need things like scissors and sutures, just ways to manipulate the tissue inside. So everything that was done in the open procedure can be done in this closed laparoscopic procedure. It's faster and a lot better for the patient. So that's kind of my spiel on my background and what I do now in real life. But I wanted to leave you guys with a couple of thoughts. So one of the most rewarding things that has happened to me over and over is when I put myself in really hard situations and when I'm really uncomfortable. It was really, really hard and uncomfortable to come to the States and not speak English. It was really, really uncomfortable to be in that internship and talk to my investigator, only understanding literally half the words on the paper. And trust me, grad school was one of the hardest and most uncomfortable experiences that I've ever gone through. But through all of those, they've made me stronger. They've made me learn more about myself and about other people. So anytime you guys have a chance to be uncomfortable, take it. And then the other point I'll leave you with is definitely take risks. And this is both in terms of career, but in terms of life instead as well. So, my mom coming to the States was a huge risk. She left everything behind and came here as a single parent. And it's a huge risk that paid off for her and paid off for me and my family. It was a huge risk to go to school that wasn't accredited for undergrad, that didn't even exist, but it paid off in a huge way. That being said though, don't take stupid risks. I mean, make sure that whatever it is that you're doing is actually worth it and it's thoroughly thought through. And then the final thing I'll leave you with is a quote by someone who's much, much wiser than I, who said that engineering is the liberal arts education for the 21st century. And I wholeheartedly believe this statement. I think in order for us to operate in the times that we live in now, you need a basic understanding of technology. You need a basic understanding of how the world works. And the good news is, it's something that's readily available and is just waiting for you to come and learn. So that's all I have. Any questions? Woo.
Those devices, the catheter devices, what is the fabric made of?
Yep, so the graft is made of Dacron. So I should say it actually depends on who the manufacturer is, but one of the most common ones is called Dacron. But the interesting thing with the fabric is it has to be really durable. It can't be permeable, right, even though it's a fabric, because if it's permeable, that means that blood is getting through the fabric, and that's definitely not something that you want. So there's a lot of interesting materials, properties, and questions around both what you make the scaffold out of and the fabric as well.
You guys choose the femoral artery?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, so that's one of the most common ways to enter when you're doing catheter-based procedures. And for those of you that don't know, so the femoral artery is in your thigh. I feel like it sometimes, this might be a little too aggressive, it sometimes comes up in like self-defense courses where they tell you like, yeah, go for the artery, go for the femoral. But anyway, so you have to, it's a major blood vessel, it's in your leg. You do have to be very, very careful when you're entering it, because if it is injured in some way, and you sometimes see this in maybe war movies where, you know, if the femoral artery is injured, you have to make sure you apply pressure to it so you don't bleed out, because you do have a lot of blood flow going through there, and you want to make sure that it's in stasis and there's not a huge volume of blood coming out. But yeah. Right in the back.
I came a little late. Where is
Unacceptable. I'm totally kidding, it's fine.
where'd you come from? What was that?
Yep, so I grew up in Russia and Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine actually, so I don't know if any of you are following the news right now, but Ukraine is in total turmoil, so it's an interesting time for me to kind of reflect and talk to some contacts that I still have there. But I came to the States when I was about 10 years old to Chicago. Yep.
What made you choose the start of college over others?
Yeah, great question. I got that asked a lot. So there were lots of reasons. I'll try to just hit on the most important ones. So when I was in high school, so junior year is when they kind of try to, at my school at least, start you thinking about colleges, the future, how to apply for them, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew even then that even though the core of what I wanted out of undergrad was technical, so I wanted to be some sort of math and science. I was still young, I was 17. College was about more than just learning math and science. I wanted to learn about the arts, I wanted to learn about languages, I wanted to learn about culture. I wanted to learn about the real world so that I could take that math and science knowledge and actually build something out of it, whether it's a machine or a company. And Olin was the only place that literally hit on all three of those points. They said, we're gonna give you the core math and science, we're gonna give you the arts and humanities, and we're gonna focus on entrepreneurship. So you have a sense of how to actually realize your dreams. So that's kind of what got me to campus, quote unquote. It was a bunch of it. But while I was there, I also got to meet the professors who would potentially be teaching me next year, and also the students that would potentially be my classmates next year. And during that process, I walked away just being totally convinced that these are the people that I wanted to be with. And actually looking back, it's not uncommon for me to make decisions or go to places based on the people there. Whether it's how I get along with them or just the expertise that they have. Basically, I always want to be in an environment where I'm learning from people. Whether that's something that's math and science related, whether it's just life related, but I really do feel like you absorb a lot from the people that you're around. So I want to make sure that I'm always around inspiring first-class people. And I knew when I went to that interview weekend for undergrad, for Olin, that there was no crowd that was better than that. Yep.
Is there research done on your PhD thesis?
Whoa, how did that even happen? That's embarrassing.
Yeah, your calendar's showing.
Yeah, hard. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
I was just wondering if the research that you're continuing is based on your thesis or your PhD.
No, the research is interesting. And it's kind of a bittersweet discussion that I have with a lot of my friends that have gotten PhDs. We'll get together and we're like, all right, guys, we survived. We're out. This is great. And then we start talking about, exactly how much of the knowledge that we gained during our PhD we use in our daily lives, or I should say in our careers. And the way that I kind of try to explain to people is like this. So when you're doing your PhD, at the very end, you have this thing called a defense. And essentially the defense is when you stand up in front of your panel of professors, all your loved ones, all your friends, your lab, anyone you can get into a room, and you present for an hour on the research that you've done. And usually the first 5, maybe 10 minutes of that is devoted to this section called background or motivation. So why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? Let's learn about some basic biology. Let's learn about the background of the specific medical device. So the stuff that I use on my daily basis is the first 5 or 10 minutes. So it's not a lot. That being said though, the analytical skills that I developed in grad school are something that I do use every day. And just the whole experience of surviving grad school has made me really, really tough. And it's something that, in my career where we're in high pressure situations, it doesn't really sway me the way that it does other people, because I did have this intense experience and I came out on the other side of it, so I feel like I can handle anything. I think there was a hand in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering, what was it that sort of helped you decide to work for the company you are now, as opposed to maybe continuing in academia and working as like a postdoc?
Yeah, it's a really good question too. So I was actually one of those people that going to grad school, I was 99% sure I was going into industry afterwards. And then when I finished, I was like 120% sure that I was going into industry. So I just knew that academia was not going to be the right place for me, because I like things that move really fast. And I also like things, as I mentioned earlier, that impact a lot of people. And I just feel like with my skill set, it's better utilized in medical devices. So that's why I wanted to go into industry. The reason why I ended up in my specific company is actually mostly because of the people. So when I was looking for jobs, a lot of what I did was have a ton of lunches and a ton of coffees, which I know networking is sometimes a dirty word, but we should rebrand that a little bit. Networking is just talking to people. So I spent quite a bit of time kind of scoping out the Bay Area in terms of companies, in terms of opportunities, etc. And one of the people that I happened to talk to connected me to Stryker. And going into a lunch with this Stryker engineer, I totally thought, all right, I'm gonna milk this guy for contacts. I'm not really interested in Stryker as a company because it's in San Jose and I live in Redwood City and I'm not driving that far. And also, I primarily thought of Stryker as an orthopedics company, so very joint-based, like knees, hips, etc. And I thought, well, I know a little bit about that, but I don't know a ton about it. So totally was not interested. Just wanted to hear a little bit about this contact's career. And basically try to get a little bit more info out of him. So I'm sitting at lunch, and we're kind of chatting, and towards the end of it, I realized, oh my God, I think I'm in a job interview. So sure enough, he asked for my resume, and I was like, well, sure, I'm looking for a job. Well, give me my resume. He brought me in-house, and I started talking to the people there, because I had a bunch of interviews that were set up for the day. And the difference between the kinds of conversations I had there versus the kinds of conversations I had at other companies, because I had interviewed at other companies before, was striking. So at other companies, I would go in for a full day of interviews, and there would be maybe 1 or 2 conversations that were actually interesting. And coming out of my Stryker interview process, every single person that I talked to was really interesting. So it was me just really seeing that I could come into this place to work every day and really enjoy working there. Plus, I make medical devices that help save people's lives.
Do you test the medical devices on animals, or how do you check it functions?
Yep, that's a really good question. So I'll give you a really broad overview, kind of a crash course of how we test things. So medical devices, according to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which moderates a lot of what we do, fall into 3 categories. Conveniently, it's class 1, 2, and 3. So class 1 device would be something like a Band-Aid. So almost no testing necessarily, it's barely a medical device. Class 3 is something like a spinal implant, so pretty important. And normally class 3 devices are anything that touches the brain or the heart, or in this case, the spine. So depending on where you are on that spectrum, will dictate what testing you need to do. So if you're in class 3, not only are you doing animal testing live, you are also doing clinical trials. So the interesting thing about clinical trials is oftentimes you do them outside the US because the regulations and restrictions are not as stringent, which sounds horrible, I know, but oftentimes when you're doing these trials and cases, at least initially, you're looking for patients that are either going to benefit from the technology or they're just not going to be around. So there are patients that are in these extreme cases where they'll sign up, and it's a really good thing for everyone. Now, for the devices that we work on are class 2, so we don't actually need human clinical trials. And so oftentimes what we do is we have pig labs or sometimes sheep labs, depending on what the device is. Sometimes that means that the animal in question is alive. Sometimes it means that it's not. And if it is alive, it depends on how long it stays alive, I'll just put it that way. So we do animal testing, and it's just something, I know not everyone's okay with that, but it's kind of something that really you need to do before you put a major device that interacts with the heart of the brain into the human body. Other questions?
Yep. What was the name of the disease that makes that bulge? And then are you continually working on that device, or are you going to be put on a new project?
Yeah, okay, so the disease is called AAA, abdominal aortic aneurysms, nothing to do with cars. So aneurysm in general is the term that's used to describe a bulging of the blood vessels. So we have the 2 most common sites are in the abdominal aorta, so actually right here along the spine, and then also in your brain. That's not a common site for aneurysms. So the project that I work on right now, as I mentioned, is the Trocars. I'm actually slowly phasing out from that project to do a little bit of more of a management leading kind of situation, but that's very recent. We're actually still trying to figure out what I'm doing next. Yep.
How do you keep it collapsed until it gets into the right place? I mean, is
Yeah.
that part of the engineering problem?
Yeah, so there's so there's 2 ways. This material, so there's 2 types of materials that you can use in stent grafts. One of them is called nitinol. Have you guys heard of nitinol? Shape memory? Okay. So nitinol is basically this material that you can program by different heat cycles to want to be in one shape at a certain temperature and want to be at another shape at a different temperature. So as it turns out, the temperature that's here in the room is really different from the temperature that's inside your body. So you can actually use that to your advantage when you're designing medical devices. So if you have something like nitinol, it has a little bit of springiness to it, so it wants to pop open. So when you stuff it into basically a smaller straw. So imagine this, let's see if I have, this is of course not gonna work, but I'm gonna force it anyway. Okay, so imagine if this tube was actually smaller and you're basically trying to stuff this and collapse it down into a smaller version of itself, right? And then once it's actually delivered inside the patient, you pull back the sheath and it just pops open. So that's one way, so that's with nitinol shape memory. Another type of material that you can make this framework out of, this is called stainless steel. What am I talking about here? So it's pretty straightforward. So stainless steel is not shape memory. You can bend it and it will stay in whatever shape that it wants to. So there's a slightly different approach with these guys. So if you look really closely, which I know is cruel to say because you're sitting really far away, the device that's in this tube, which is basically a very metallic-y looking straw, is actually the same device as this right here. The only difference is that the device inside the straw right here hasn't been expanded yet. Now remember, it's a stainless steel, so it's not going to expand by itself. It's not shape memory. So what happens is you have to insert a balloon inside the lumen. So imagine, I'm using multiple devices here. So imagine this is in its collapsed form, and you're basically snaking a balloon inside of here, and then you blow up the balloon. And by the virtue of the balloon blowing up, you're expanding this whole framework. So that's another method that you go from something that's really small and collapsed to something that has a much greater diameter. These are good questions, by the way.
So I'm curious, have you managed summer interns who are college students? And if so, what makes a really great intern and what makes a not so great intern?
Great question. I haven't managed anyone at my current company, but I do have a lot of experience with mentoring. I think, and this is gonna sound really corny, but honestly, showing up is a huge part. If you show up and you show that you have a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, that will get you to 95% of where you need to be. And I know a lot of times when you're interviewing for whether it's an internship or a job or just some sort of career opportunity, I feel like a lot of the upfront screening is really focused on, hey, what are your skills? What's your resume? But a lot of it is, honestly, can you work with the people that are at this company? And are the people at this company gonna enjoy working with you? So just putting in the energy, showing up, being inquisitive and curious, I think that those are things that will just carry you far, not only in an internship, but just in life in general. Wait, in the back, yep.
Yeah, after I'm a life coach, because I actually have 1 year stints in me, and it wasn't a simple procedure. They had tried to put in stents before, and I guess not all stents work, and not all tools work. So I think it's a Stryker. They gave you the brochures after the procedure. You're supposed to read up on them. So, but my question for you was, you said you were now making, in your career, you're kind of making a decision to maybe go more into management and all that. Can you tell us what you're thinking of that process? And did you think that when you were going to school that you would lead heads down engineering and be looking for management roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the answer to the last one is yes. I actually had a pretty strong feeling that even after grad school and Ph.D., I was not going to be the person that's, in lab, making all the tests or creating whatever device that I wanted to create. And the reason for that is because my general philosophy in life is to master and kind of move on. So I felt like I did have this very technical deep dive in my PhD, where I was very much immersed in science and engineering. I know I can do that now, because I've done it. What I haven't done on a large scale is managing projects and actually, getting something out the door in a medical device corporate setting. And so that new challenge is really exciting to me because, let's face it, I kind of know what I'm doing, but I'm also faking a little bit. So that feeling of uncomfortable is the position that I'm in right now, but that is something that I really look for a lot.
Thank you.
I see like half hands around the room. Don't be shy.
Do you have any advice for students when they're at this stage, when they're in these hard courses and they're not doing the cool, interesting research quite yet? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, this might actually tie back to sort of like the internship and resume topic that I referred to earlier. So, and a couple of questions that came up today. So, around this notion of, hey, how much of what you do in school actually applies to the real world of what you're doing now? And most of the time, the answer is little or none at all. That's not the point, though. The point of taking these really hard engineering classes, aside from getting all the knowledge that you need to, is that you can look at yourself in the mirror and you can look at your employer and say, I've done something really, really hard. I've done it, I've finished it, I'm on the other side of it. And that means that you have discipline, that means you know how to sacrifice, that means you know how to manage your time, and those are all things that are the marks of a successful individual.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.